Have your students finished listening to something or reading in the target language, and you looked around the room and wondered, did anyone actually understand that? Now, this isn't because your students weren't trying, and it's not because the language was even too challenging, but it's because they didn't yet know how to listen for meaning. Today's episode is about something that often gets overlooked in our language teaching classrooms, and that is that students have to learn the skill of comprehension. And a few small daily routines can really have a big impact on students learning this essential skill. So, let's jump in. Whether you're planning your first lesson or celebrating your 20th year in the language classroom, I understand exactly where you are. I'm Joshua Cabral, and I'm also a language teacher in my 29th year of teaching. Now, I also have the opportunity to support schools and teachers all across the country who are working towards increasing proficiency and building confidence in their students. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast, with over 200 episodes of practical strategies tested in real classrooms just like yours and mine. So let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you, as always, for spending the time with me here on the podcast each week. I really appreciate the fact that you're a teacher that really wants to look at your teaching, how you are teaching language in your classroom, to get that reassurance that you're on the right track and you're doing some really great stuff, and also to have those opportunities to maybe switch it up a little bit, to hone that craft a little more and improve in some areas. Just one of the many things that I know that you do that makes you an incredible language teacher, and I thank you very much for being here with me. So we are going to look at comprehension as a skill that students are learning. And I use that to say that comprehension is indeed a skill and not a byproduct of everything else that we are doing, like CI in the classroom. So we really are looking at learning this as a skill and not just something that happens because of everything else that we're doing. And this comes from a place where many teachers can assume that comprehension improves sort of automatically if we just give students more input and a lot of comprehensible input. And the more that we do this, as a byproduct of that, students will grow in their comprehension. Whereas if we look at it as a skill, it's really something that they can focus on and improve. Because comprehension doesn't grow through exposure alone. That students are just reading a lot, listening a lot, and then somehow, as a byproduct of all of that, students will grow in their skill of comprehension. But we really do need to focus on how to actually do that. Students need help knowing where to focus their attention and then how to process what they are hearing and reading. And so essentially, this makes them a very active participant in this skill building. And we talk a lot about comprehensible input, and this is everything that we are doing to support students in understanding what they are listening and what they're reading, whether that is pre-listening, pre-reading activities, support during through visuals, or maybe bringing the language to their proficiency level or just above, so it's I+1. So there's a lot that we can do in terms of making the language comprehensible for students, and this is our whole movement of CI that happens in our classrooms. And CI provides that support and scaffolding, and this is an area of performance. So when we talk about performance rather than proficiency, it's because it's in a structured classroom setting with the support of the teacher. But what about proficiency? Now, this is what happens without all of that support in the real world. So when we provide CI to students, when we provide this comprehensible input to students, they are getting to that place of understanding with that support and with that scaffolding. But when it comes to proficiency and none of that is there, what happens? How are students going to engage with the language in print, or if they're listening to it, when they don't have that scaffolding that's provided in our classroom setting? That's really where this skill of comprehension comes in. So in your classroom, if you have students read a short paragraph, say about a student's weekend, and then you ask, did everyone understand? And heads will nod and say, yes, I basically understood that. And then you ask, so what did he do on Saturday, the person in the story? And then you get some silence. And that moment reveals something really important. And that's that students often hear the language and they read the language, but they don't yet know exactly how to maybe extract the meaning from it when they don't have that direct support that we typically give them when we are providing comprehensible input. So what are students going to do in that moment when they sort of go out into the real world? So how can we support them with that? Because when we use CI effectively, students do understand and they can show their understanding, but there's always the question of what happens when that scaffolding isn't there. So our role as teachers is not just about providing input and not just about providing comprehensible input, but our goal is really guiding students through the process of making meaning. And that will initially happen when we make the meaning comprehensible to them with all the tools that we can use to make that happen with our students. CI, comprehensible input, is useful for building language subconsciously. It is the essential ingredient for language acquisition. This is what allows students to understand and internalize new language rather naturally, rather than just memorizing rules. That is the purpose of CI. And so when they understand language, they can internalize it, they can find patterns, and they can acquire vocabulary. That's what CI is for. So that is the purpose of it. But now we need to consider the skill of comprehension when students engage with language that does not have all of that CI embedded in it, that does not have that whole approach to comprehensible input embedded into the activities. So when we do CI, the purpose is for students to understand the language enough to be able to extract patterns, to make meaning, and then to subconsciously acquire language. That's what we're doing with CI. But when we want students to understand a text and the goal is just understanding, or they're listening to something and the goal is to understand, but not necessarily to pull out the patterns and make meaning of the structures and the vocabulary. So that is the very purpose of CI. It is that opportunity for students to understand language at their level and just a bit above so that they're able to pull out patterns and acquire vocabulary subconsciously. But when it comes to just simple comprehension of a text or comprehension of something that they're listening to, where the goal is not to pull out those linguistic elements subconsciously, then that is a different skill. And particularly when they engage with any language outside of our classroom walls, they are not going to have it done in a way that provides comprehensible input. So we have to move beyond always just doing comprehensible input so that students have the skill to be able to read and understand spoken language when they're not in our classroom situations where we're making it comprehensible for them. So absolutely keep going with everything you're doing with CI in your classroom. That's how students are acquiring the language subconsciously and they're finding all those patterns and making meaning. So absolutely keep doing that. But in addition to that, we have to make sure that we are providing skills and opportunities to students so that they can engage with the language and use everything they've acquired, even when they don't have that comprehensible input layered over what they are listening to or what they're reading. So how can we address this in our classrooms? And I would offer a simple shift to start with. And this is when we ask a question after students listen or they read. And again, this is not something that we would label comprehensible input because we're not giving them the tools and the structure and the scaffolding. This is something they're doing independently from that. So instead of just simply asking, did you understand? Or a thumbs up, thumbs down, some way of indicating, ask something that's more detailed or an open-ended question that requires understanding to respond. Now, this whole idea of asking open-ended questions or details about what they read rather than did you understand, this is not something that's new. You're not hearing this for the first time, but it is worth reiterating to make sure that we are doing that in our classrooms so that when students are reading or listening in a way that is not truly scaffolded in the way we normally do with CI, if we simply ask, do you understand? They might say yes, but we don't actually have the evidence of that. So asking questions where students have to show their understanding will give us much more of a sense of how much they're actually understanding. So this type of simple change really lowers the pressure and focuses students on finding meaning. So, for example, if you're working with novice level students, so say students read a short description, the girl has a small dog and the dog is sleeping on the bed. So they're either listening to this or they're reading this. And instead of asking just simple comprehension questions immediately, ask students to finish a sentence starter, such as, I understood that, or I understand that. So I understand that there is a girl. I understand that the girl has a dog. I understand that the dog is sleeping on the bed. So all of these details are helping them to show meaning rather than just this or that or either or, and providing no scaffolding so that they're just going into this on their own. So making sure that we're not just asking, did you understand, but give them an opportunity to show their meaning. Because students learn that comprehension isn't this all or nothing, that they learn that partial understanding still counts, that they're still able to understand something. And these are these small wins that really start to build confidence in our students. So moving beyond the did you understand and then giving them an opportunity to truly show their understanding by providing details or something other than a simple comprehension question. Now, again, this is being done without scaffolding because this is showing what they're able to do on their own. And then we want to look at guiding students' attention to what they're reading or what they're listening to without explaining everything, because we tend to break it down to every little detail when we're doing comprehensible input activities. But in this case, where it's not having that same sort of scaffolding, they do not need to focus on the smaller details. You really want them to focus on understanding generally or the gist of what they're listening to or what they're reading, because that's what's going to happen in the real world when they are engaging with the language. So another common teaching habit is that we will stop constantly to explain vocabulary, but comprehension often improves more when we guide attention rather than focus on the word level all the time. Now, this may be necessary, that there has to be a literal comprehension. There has to be the vocabulary level, sentence level comprehension before the overall understanding. But we don't want to stay in that area. We want to make sure that we are opening up beyond that, because that's what they're going to need when they engage with the language beyond our walls. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on things like who or what the message is about, or what happened, or what changed, or why something matters. All of this takes it beyond the word and sentence level and helps them to look overall at the meaning. So, for example, if you're telling a short story and it is about Mateo who lost his backpack at school. So before listening, tell students what they should be listening for. So you're listening for one particular thing, not just everything. So what problem does Mateo have? Now, this is not what did he lose, because now they're very specifically listening for that one little thing, but you're giving them a prompt, but it's still general enough that they have to listen closely. So when you ask them what problem did he have rather than what did he lose, that changes a bit of the dynamic of how they're engaging. So now students are listening with purpose. So this is about giving students a listening mission, and their attention is going to be more focused. Because without it, students try to understand every word, and that can be very overwhelming very quickly. So you're giving them that mission, that purpose, that focus of what they're listening for, and that is a sort of prompting, that is a sort of giving them the scaffolding. But whenever they are listening or reading something, it's usually not just random, so whether they're engaging with this outside of the walls of your classroom and they're reading something on the internet or they're listening to a song or a podcast, they have some general sense of what it's going to be about. So they aren't going into it completely not knowing, but it's also helping them and giving them that skill of what do I want to listen for or read for in particular. And to know, I just want to give you some micro comprehension moves. That's what I like to call these little opportunities we can take in our classroom to build comprehension on a daily basis, things you could do every day. And I call these micro moves because they are 10 to 30 seconds. They don't require preparation. It's about what you're doing in the moment. So they take 10 to 30 seconds, and they fit inside any lesson. And the goal is really helping students to actively process meaning. And when not done in a way where it's presented with lots of comprehensible input, then they have no choice sometimes than to really focus on globally what they understand rather than at the word and sentence level, which tends to happen when we're using comprehensible input. So the first thing you can have students do is point something out to show that they understood. So if they hear, the cat is sleeping on the chair, so they can point to, okay, what did you hear in this sentence? And there's a couple of animals. They can point to the cat, and then there's a couple of pieces of furniture, and there's maybe a picture of a bed or a table or a chair, and then they will point to the chair. So they heard about a cat, and they are on the chair. That in the moment, you provided no scaffolding, and it's a way for them to just point out what they were able to understand when they heard that. So just pointing things out. Simple, in the moment, quick, takes a couple of seconds. The second micro move is giving students a choice. So they hear this story about something that happened, they've read a little story, and then you say, what happened? And you have some choices. So the boy bought pizza or the boy made pizza. And they choose those based on what happened in the story. Now, it's not the details of what he put on the pizza or what he ordered when he ordered the pizza or who's he with in the restaurant or who's at home, who's he cooking for. Those are lots of other details, right? But when you open it up by just saying what happened, they can basically understand that he was in a restaurant and he bought pizza, or he was at home and he was cooking because clearly he was in his kitchen, so he made pizza. So in that case where they're just choosing, here's two possibilities of what's happened, and a lot of times students will say, well, that's really easy. It's obvious. He's in his kitchen, so he is making the pizza and he didn't buy it, and he talked about the ingredients and who was with him and whatever else is happening in the story. But that's basically all you wanted them to get in that case. And that's a quick in the moment. And it makes them feel like, oh, I understand this. And then you can go deeper into the story. Another thing you can have students do is sequence events. So students might hear 3 or 4 events that happen in something they're listening to, a story, or they're reading, or maybe it's a current events article, and different things are happening and there's a sequence. And so you could have them say, oh, okay, she studies and then she drinks coffee and then she takes the test or whatever. Or the president spoke on the news yesterday and he said that this happened and that they're going to try this, and then this was the reaction of people around the city when some sort of event happened. So if that is what you're doing in terms of current events. But in that case, you're just giving students the sequence of events that possibly happened and what they listened to and what they read, and they put it in order to show their comprehension. So now you can see that when we're doing these, whether we started with the pointing out things or choosing what actually happened in the story, did he buy pizza or did he make pizza, or sequencing the events, all of these require a more global general understanding. And that's where we want students to move towards when they're engaging with any listening or reading that doesn't have the benefit of comprehensible input. It shows that, oh, I can get the full meaning of this and I don't have to focus on the small details. And one last micro move that you could try is to have students restate. And so after they listen or read, they can just simply say, I understood that. And just a quick response. I understood that the president spoke on the news. I understood that there was a new player on the basketball team. I understood that the soccer team won the game. So they're basically just restating simply the general gist of what they were listening to, what they were reading. And so none of this is really sentence level. So start there. Do this regularly so that students can get comfortable with I can understand something at a general level, whether I'm listening or reading, without always the benefit of comprehensible input. Now, again, we want to do the comprehensible input in the classroom. That's how students are acquiring language, but we have to remember they're not going to have that outside the walls of our classrooms, so we have to make sure that they're having the opportunity to engage in this skill and to feel confident in what they're reading and listening to. And by doing these sorts of micro moves and opportunities for students to feel confident in understanding on their own, these are really providing predictable routines. And this is what's going to help to reduce the cognitive load on students and to remove anxiety and make it less overwhelming for them. Because students struggle less when comprehension routines become familiar to them. If you ask them to sequence or point out or say what you understood, this becomes a regular part of what you do. They get used to it, and they know that it's low stakes, and you're not asking a specific detail, but just generally what happened and what did you understand. And these routines provide this predictability that allows them to spend less mental energy on what the whole actual activity is and more on understanding the language. So you want to start with, listen for one particular idea. So not all the details about it, but generally just that one idea. What kind of animals are they talking about? What is the problem that they're talking about? What is the solution that they come up with? Or they could identify the people that are involved in the story. They could identify the issue that is happening with the environment, whatever that article might be that you're looking at. Or you could have them share what they understood about the article, what they understood about what they listened to, what they understood about a short paragraph that they read. But giving them that idea that it's looking globally at their understanding rather than at the word level and sentence level, because that's what they're going to need as a skill for comprehension when they don't have all the support of our comprehensible input outside of the walls of our classroom. And if you try to make these micro comprehension moves a part of what happens in your classroom, you will see that students come to expect them and that their comprehension will improve, but also their confidence and their motivation to listen because they know that they're able to do it. So in this episode, I've shared a few quick comprehension strategies that you can do regularly with students to really help them daily to improve that skill of comprehension. But if you'd like to dive a little deeper, you can take a look at one of my Ready for Tomorrow Quick Win courses. It's called Daily Strategies That Build Comprehension. I go a bit deeper on these topics, and inside the course, you'll get an audio lesson that's perfect for all you busy teachers out there. And along with that, our planning templates, examples, and all of the notes to refer to as you're listening, as well as to look back at after. There are reflection prompts to help fine-tune your practice, and then also a certificate of completion for your PD portfolio, and I will give you specific feedback on a lesson plan idea that you submit as well. Now, the goal of this course is to really help teachers like you build daily comprehension habits that fit pretty naturally into your instruction. So if this episode sparked ideas for you, you'll find the link to the course in the show notes, or you can get it at wlclassroom.com/daily strategies. So for this week, let's bring this back to something practical that you can try immediately. So pick one class period this week and add 2 comprehension moves to it. Are you going to have them point something out, sequence, restate, anything like that? Give them a question so that in the moment that they can show their overall understanding, the gist understanding of what they're reading, what they're listening to, without the benefit of comprehensible input. So try a couple of those. So identify what that input is going to be. So where are students already listening or reading? So don't create something new. This is about layering on to what you already do. And choose one focus. What is that one thing you want students to understand globally, the gist of the whole thing, remember, not sentence level, and then figure out what is going to be that micro strategy you're going to use in the moment. Are students going to point to a picture, choose a correct statement that identifies the general idea of what they read or listened to? Are they going to sequence events or finish that sentence, I understood that? So have students do that. And then reflect on it after the class. Did students seem more focused on meaning? And which strategy felt the most natural to you? Was it the pictures? Was it the correct statement, the sequencing, the finishing of the sentence? That's going to depend on the proficiency level that you're teaching. But give these a shot in your classroom and as a beginning. And then after you've done that, then move on to your comprehensible input strategies that you're going to use for understanding globally the text at the beginning, and then get into the details for what they're listening to, what they're reading. Use all of the great CI strategies that are out there to help students to understand, but give them that opportunity before all of that to see that they can get into a text or listen to something in the target language and be able to pull out their overall understanding of it. So this skill of comprehension isn't something that just happens when students hear or read enough language, that it's a byproduct of all of the work that we do with students in the classroom. It is something that we teach students how to do. And by teaching the skill, I mean it's teaching the confidence of approaching it and saying, I do not have to understand every single word in detail to get the overall meaning of what I'm listening to or what I'm reading. That's the skill that we are teaching students. And if we're always providing the support of comprehensible input, we don't give them the opportunity to build that confidence muscle. And often the most effective improvements come from those small daily choices that we make in our classrooms, like those micro moves. So if you would like to go further and have a clear system and a framework for building comprehension skills each day in your classroom, be sure to take a look at the Daily Strategies That Build Comprehension Quick Win PD course. It's ready for you. The link is in the show notes, or you can get it at wlclassroom.com/dailystrategies. Thanks for listening and for all the incredible work you do to help your students become confident, real-world communicators. If you'd like more ideas to bring proficiency-focused strategies into your teaching, you'll find options for you and your school in the show notes and on my website. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And let's stay connected on social media. You can find me at WL Classroom pretty much everywhere. You'll also find lots of ideas, suggestions, and resources on my website, WLClassroom.com. Now stay curious, keep learning, and continue the great work you do inspiring and supporting your students.